Hi everybody, I'm Vanquished Angel and welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is going to be the millennials. You always hear about the millennials. You pretty much hear about them ad nauseum, actually, because they're the new generation and everybody loves to pick on them. The millennials are doing this, millennials are eating Tide Pods, millennials are snorting condoms, millennials. What are millennials going to do? What's going to happen to the world? The millennials. And honestly, this conversation is so tired. And here's the weird part, I sit and listen to this and first off, the world that they're in super sucks. Okay? People talk about how lazy they are, but honestly, I remember back in the day, this generation called Generation X, or the video game generation, and all you heard the older people was saying, oh, Generation X, the video game generation, they're so lazy, they're never going to do anything with their lives, they're just so bad and horrible, and all this complaining, and that was my generation they were complaining about. Now they're just complaining about the next generation, and that's my generation doing it. But before my generation and my parents' generation was my grandparents' generation, who, by the way, did a lot of complaining about them gyrating hips and all this dirty satanistic dancing, and the generation's just gonna go to hell. And honestly, I don't remember anything productive coming from any of these conversations. It just makes people feel bad, and it kind of alienates the next generation. And there's nothing useful of it. Every generation does it, but that doesn't mean that's something that we should be continuing. Honestly, it's something we should be growing up out of, actually. And so, on the other side note, there is one thing that is a constant, and that is each generation actually does have it worse than the previous generation in many ways. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. Okay, so abuse is getting better. That's great, and that's a good thing. So they're not as abused as the generations before. However, they're in a lot worse economy. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that the millennials just don't have anything because they're lazy. Well, some are lazy, but that's not 100% the truth. The truth is that things were more affordable back then. Per hour worth of work. Good example, like minimum wage right now is $7.25, and to get a bottle of soda, like a bottle of Coke, not that it's needed, but this is just an example, it's $1.99. So they can't buy 3 bottles of soda for 1 hour's worth of work. Because it's just, you could actually. You can't buy 4. Let's put it that way. But let's think about this here. Okay, so you can't buy 4 bottles of soda for 1 hour's worth of work anymore. At minimum wage, anyway. But you could back when I started working. When I started working, soda was 69 cents a bottle for that same bottle. But minimum wage was $4.25. So how many bottles of soda could I buy? And I'll tell you in just a minute, because I didn't think this through because I kind of do everything on the fly. But so it was, minimum wage was $4.25, and we're going to divide 69 cents. We could buy 6.5 bottles of soda. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, and it's a bottle of soda, but then you got to remember, every product, everything has followed this same formula. So it's not just soda. That's food, too. That's house. Actually, housing is worse. That's rent. That's gas in your car. That's college. Back in 1970, I forget the exact cost, and I had this all figured out before, but in 1970, you could work 4.8 hours a day and pay for a year's worth of college at Yale. Okay? Just by working 4.3 hours a day at minimum wage, which is like $1.50. Today, at minimum wage, to pay 1 year's worth at Yale, you need to work 17.3 hours a day, and that was a few years ago when it was last calculated. So there is a vast difference in the world that they're trying to survive in. So we can judge them as lazy. They didn't achieve as much as perhaps maybe we feel we did, or our parents feel they did, but they're neglecting something. They had a much easier economy. So next time you want to sit and complain and piss and moan about millennials, remember, they're not in the same world as we were. They're not in the same... They have to make it in a much harder economy than what we did. A lot less jobs than what we had available. Because there's more people. And fewer jobs being created. And the highlight of our society, I always thought was the 1980s, but it really wasn't. It was actually our parents' generation. Which may be my parents, 50s, 60s, and 70s. That was kind of the peak of a lot of our civilization in terms of a good economy. Because they actually had a good economy. And a lot of them talk about how hard it was and how they fought through and they did it themselves. Honestly, if you figure it out, their economy was much easier. So buying a house in their day, way easier. Probably, I want to say, it's been a while since I figured it out, but I want to say 3 times easier than it is in this economy for millennials. And a lot of people will say, well, they don't have to work minimum wage jobs, go to school, go to trade school, go to blah, blah, blah. While you're 100% valid in that, it negates quite a few things. For instance, back in 1970, you could get those very same jobs without going to a trade school. And they had guaranteed raises, most of them, back then, including places like McDonald's. And because of the way the economy was, labor laws and things, quite a few jobs paid quite a bit more than minimum wage. For instance, installing an air conditioner back in 1970 was $10 an hour. Today, that very same job is about $15. So notice only a 50% increase. Meanwhile, this bottle of soda here has had at least a 300% increase, right? Or close to. That's kind of the vast difference in economies that we're living in. And not to mention the cost of schooling to do such things now is freaking astronomical compared to what it was back in 1970. So back in 1970, you could be a journeyman or a college, and it was much more realistic than it is today. So kind of remember that when you're thinking about millennials and you're up on your high horse, thinking about how much better you actually are than them and talking down to them. Remember how you felt when your parents talked down to you. Remember how your parents felt about how lazy you were going to be as being part of the video game generation. Or if you're older than me, then part of that satanistic generation of gyrating hips. Each generation has their thing, and we all pick on the next one. But we need to grow up out of it. That's pretty much it. All right. Have a good day.